So it looks like after Luigi, the left needed a new hero to stand behind, and this is the kind of people they seem to always choose: murderers who go after people, after innocent people for nothing in particular, really. So yeah, many people might already know, especially if they watched the Daily Objective on Wednesday, yesterday, 21st of May, 2025. Elias Rodriguez has decided to go outside of the Capital Jewish Museum to basically, yeah, murder Yaron Lishinsky and Sarah Lynn Milgram. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. In the intro, it's a very both sad and truly disturbing event to happen, especially in the capital of America, especially with the sort of what has been happening in the last few years or so with the rise of anti-Semitism and sort of targeted attacks against the Jewish people. Welcome to the reality show. Joining me today is Anders Ingemarsson, and on this show, we talked about this also on the Daily Objective, and here we'll talk about more the context of this happening, as well as comparing to some of the past things that have happened. But Anders, uh, any of your first thoughts about this event itself?
Yeah, it's obviously a very tragic incident that happened here with two people being gunned down at, as you said, the Capitol Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C. Both worked for the Israeli embassy. I believe they are both U.S. citizens. Yeah, it's not entirely surprising, unfortunately, that these things continue to happen. I think in this conflict, it's the first incident, correct me if I'm wrong, where actually someone has been killed following the Hamas start of the Hamas conflict now 18 months ago, that any Israeli have been killed on U.S. soil. So in that sense, it's uh, yeah, it's another tragic step in this, and I can't help but uh, going back to the fact that this conflict has been prolonged so far beyond what should have been necessary in the first place, and connecting this a little bit to the hostage situation where Israel is, or many in Israel, I should say, not everybody, but many in Israel put that ahead of everything else. And, and that, of course, is contributing to prolonging the conflict. And that's why we see these tragic events happening. So now we have two young people dead. Um, as a result of this conflict dragging out over these 18 months, and who knows when it will end.
Yeah, and talking about the sort of like reasons for prolonging this effect, the fact that I cannot remember where sort of what we call now the campus intifada has started, but it happened very early into this war. Like a week in, or days in, you had people in the U.S. Congress calling for a ceasefire. Again, even if Israel went in
Mhm. Mhm.
completely, you couldn't expect them to like finish it in the few days, which according to international community was pretty much what they had. They had like a few days before you already saw the cracks within sort of the support for Israeli action. You had the ICJ case, I think already in December, so just 2 months in. So yeah, this continuous like attacks on Israel, and anytime Israel is trying to do something, right? If you take Operation Gideon's Chariots, the fact that already the operation itself was sort of not enough what had to happen, but it had elements of it, like actual indefinite occupation, at least what has been told. And even that was too crazy. You had the whole world pretty much going against it. You had, I mean, this guy, uh, Elias Rodriguez. So there is a manifesto that is supposedly by him, written on 20th. I've seen it, I've read it, but I don't think the confirmation, if it really was him, is as sort of. We don't know 100%, so I wouldn't want to draw upon it too much. But we also have his ex, and he has been parroting the sort of the same old arguments against Israel. Um,
Yeah, but so the fact that the conflict is dragging out, I would argue, is fueling the this resistance, because the vermin is coming out of the woodwork, out of the sewers, and whatever is going on in Israel, and every little thing when there's a Palestinian killed, it kind of keeps fueling this flame, instead of, if Israel would have addressed this decisively early on in the conflict, maybe ended it after 2, 3 months or something. Yes, hostages would have died, sorry, but that would have not necessarily put an end to it, but a lot of the protest and things would die down, and people would move on. But with the lack of resolve that has been demonstrated over and over and over again, that is encouraging these protesters. And I would argue that this incident is another example of that, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, on some level, not simply sort of like prolonging this war, but also Israel's sort of lack of moral conviction in fighting the war, right? If
Yeah.
the other side sort of can feel the moral indecisiveness of Israel to latch on. Now, a bit
Yeah, and
later,
in
yeah.
that sense, unfortunately, Israel is in some sense its own worst enemy here. The fact of the internal conflict within Israel between different factions, different groups, is obviously not helping the cause.
Now, something about generally this sort of like rise of political violence, and it depends how sort of like far you want to go, but to not make it too long, let's say sort of like go back to the BLM riots, right? You had maybe in some cases sort of like justified anger to sort of some sort of like police action, but the response to it oftentimes was riots to innocent business owners, oftentimes business on sort of like minority owned business owners, right? There are many sort of clips from the past, sort of like of black men and women basically denouncing the protests because of they are like committing violence against their own business. This
Mhm.
kind of like lashing out of political violence, which again, sort of when we talk about political violence and sort of like is political violence justified, you sort of like have to define it. Sort of like when it comes to the civil disobedience, or sort of like disagreeing with what the government is doing and standing up to it. You do it by breaking that specific law that you disagree with. Sort of if, let's say, the civil rights movement, if there is like a separation between sort of like black and white fountains, you do it by breaking that specific law, getting arrested for it, and trying to bring a population on your side. You don't do it by just killing random people or destroying random property because you have some problem with the system right now. And this is exactly what has been happening in the last few years, right? Some people disagree with what the government is doing or some actions, or the system itself in some way, and simply lash out and in this case kill you know random or not random people, they were targeted, right? You kill Jews or just kill Israelis because they have some connection to it. Yeah, and what do you make of this sort of like rise of not necessarily sort of like specifically political violence, but sort of just this general lashing out of you disagree with something that's happening, so you try to solve it by, yeah, killing innocent people.
Well, I think there is not necessarily for if we talk these individuals in question. I mean, they're not trying to solve anything. Uh, there is definitely an element of hatred of the good for being the good here. We see it in I mean, Israel is the in this particular conflict is considered the oppressor in their own terms, and the Palestinians are the victims, the little guy, and that qualifies them for un, for their support. Now, going back to your question about what kind of violence is motivated, civil disobedience is one thing, but obviously you have to draw the line where individual rights are violated. Now, civil obedience is justified when you're fighting immoral laws. You have to be prepared to take the consequences, unfortunately. But when we're talking about civil rights, for instance, I mean, there were in many of the southern states in the United States, there were laws that prevented that violated individual rights of primarily blacks, and so it's you can protest those laws, and civil obedience is, I think, a valid form of protest, but you always have to draw the line at violating individual rights, including property rights of others. And obviously, murder is the most extreme rights violation there is.
Yeah, and so this general sort of well, let's go to some of the responses that I've at least seen. So Cenk Uygur, of course, has the worst take of all time as ever. He technically, I guess, condemned it. He said Cenk Uygur is the I think is like, I'm not sure if specifically the CEO, but the guy behind the ARCUK, the sort of like lefty progressive media group. He said, "You can't do more harm to the Palestinian cause than by killing Israeli embassy staffers. It's obviously immoral. It makes a whole community feel unsafe. It's also deeply counterproductive because it allows people to frame the whole peace movement as violent, deeply stupid." So, what was wrong about this? It's counterproductive. It's bad optics. This and sort of like trying to say that the whole Palestinian crowd in America was peaceful until now. That basically, and this is the same thing. Again, don't want to draw too much upon the manifesto, but this is what was said in the manifesto that until now, the whole movement was peaceful, but now we have to do like something different. That's ridiculous. The university protests were violating property rights on the crazy level, where destroying property on the ground. Many times people were injured in those. Police had to be called to basically handle the situation. At Colombia, for example, after the arrest of Mahmoud Khalil, they one of those organizations, I think it was the Jewish Voice for Peace, has basically went into Trump's one of Trump's hotels and took it over. Basically, sort of like staged it with no sort of permission, no allowance, let themselves all get arrested, which again is violence. That doing that is violence. You can hide behind saying, nobody was hurt or nobody was killed or anything in that. But any sort of that situation is violent, is a violation of property rights. So trying to act as this was the first time something like this has happened, or even the first time that somebody died. Someone I want to go into a bit later is Aaron Bushnell. I'm not sure if you remember him. He was the guy. He was the former soldier who set himself on fire. Now, technically, suicide is not a violation of rights, but it's still somebody who decided to kill himself over sort of his disagreement of how this is being fought. And in a similar way, he was sort of celebrated. He was viewed as like, this is the guy who sort of like is standing up for Palestinians. Yeah, I mean, Anders, what do you make of
He
this?
was he
Yeah.
was celebrated in certain quarters, but there were a lot of people who condemned his action as well here in the U.S. Yeah, he and I don't know if that would qualify as civil disobedience, but yeah, it's obviously a fruitless attempt of trying uh, to make a point. I mean, it's despicable. I think is the best word to describe it. So how did we get there? What what was your
Uh,
question?
the question, so Cheng Yuger says that this allows, I guess us, he's referring to frame the whole peace movement as violent. So what do you make of
No, yeah, no, okay, thank you. So, yes, as you said, all these occupations and such, those were violations of property. Now, we have, unfortunately, a lot of common um, public property in terms of squares and sidewalks and streets and such, which is contributes to this, what I call the tragedy of the public square, in that property rights are not well defined. And so there is, a kind of a right to demonstrate. In most places, you need to have a permit and so on and so forth. And if you don't get your permit, yeah, then you're breaking a law or an ordinance or whatever. But I want to take this back to the fact that all of this arises because of the lack of moral clarity. Now, we talked about how this tragedy in Washington D.C. now is an extension of the fact that Israel has not been able to execute this war as quickly and swiftly as we would have desired. And similarly, here in the U.S., the lack of moral clarity means that this has been going on and on for way too long. Let's say that at the beginning of it, that someone would have laid down the rules and said, this is not okay. This would have petered out. It would have fizzled out very quickly. And yes, some people would have continued to debate, to argue, but protests would have, disappeared very, very quickly. But the lack of moral clarity at universities, among politicians, obviously, and to some extent the general public, has allowed this to fester for way too long.
yeah, and sort of what did I want to bring up? Uh, Oh, you said something I wanted to comment on. Now I cannot remember. Um, okay, I'll just sort of go to the next point. Yeah, I mean this sort of viewing this as acceptable. Oh, yeah, you were talking about sort of like what was permitted earlier now sort of like allows for this. And yeah, I mean, going back, the fact that, we had many of those sort of, you had a lot of protests at the colleges, hiding behind protests, but as we said, sort of occupying parts of it, breaking the rules of the university, and oftentimes we heard sort of like, oh, they might not graduate, or some people were arrested, so something might happen, but time after time, when that happened, everybody was allowed to graduate. Everybody, the people who were arrested were pretty much let go. So you had this, yeah, this, and again, these are young people. These are students
Yeah.
who basically, what are you telling them? It actually, I didn't think of making this connection, but it reminds me of this one show. It's a South Korean show about the juvenile courts in South Korea, and how basically the way it's set up, oftentimes the way the children under the age of like 13 are not really punished for what they do. So what they come out with is this idea that you can just do whatever you want because you won't actually feel the consequences of it. And now we are doing that with university students. They can do whatever they want. They can violate the rights of, or they can violate the rules of the university. They can violate individual rights, go and occupy hotel. In many cases, people get injured during those events, and then nothing happens to them. They won't get
Yeah,
arrested.
no.
They
So
won't get fired.
so they are applying bullying tactics, or have been for a long time, and we all know that the only way to deal with bullies is to punch them in the face. I mean, not literally, but and that often takes care of the bully, because if he doesn't get a pushback, then he will just continue, and it's the same thing here. But there is really hasn't been anybody who has been willing to punch back at the bully in an effective way over the last 18 months here.
And yeah, so the big question is gonna be, and you have to also think of the way he has done it. Now, I wanna maybe a bit later we can talk a bit more about Luigi Mangione, the guy who killed the United Health CEO. But he tried to sort of flee. Now he was caught in a few days, but this guy, Elias Rodriguez, he didn't even do it in a way that sort of would allow him to flee. He did it publicly. He was in the area. He pretty much let himself get arrested, or he didn't even bother to sort of flee. This amount of I mean, you cannot call it something different than nihilism, right? He was pretty much he martyred himself. He pretty much went on. I mean, again, don't want to draw too much on the manifesto, but at the end of manifesto, he sort of says he said like goodbye to his family. This is something he sort of like has to do. So this amount of basically, yeah, martyrdom, that you pretty much view yourself as. Yeah, I just have to do this for the cause. I have to do this. This cannot be. I mean, the amount of sort of lenience we have given to sort of violence in the past, this cannot be allowed. On the TDO, we talked to James about what sort of, if this goes to trial, what might happen. Um, what might happen, and if the federal charges go through, that basically a death sentence is something that is possible. It is something you could get for federal crime, and at the very least, this guy should never see the light of the day, right? There is no way you can get this was public. There is no way to sort of there is no way to defend this in any way. And if this truly does go to the trial, I'm sure this will be highly publicized. Everybody will be watching this case. And I think we'll see something revealing about if anybody tries to defend these sort of actions. I mean, Anders, where do obviously this just happened. We don't know much, but where do you think we're going? Where do you think we're sort of like going from now on? Either with sort of like if trial happens and what that would mean, but generally with, yeah, I mean, the anti-Semitism has been rising since October 7th, right? Generally, violence even against Jews has been rising for years. Now we are at a point where people are getting killed in Western countries. Again, we're not talking about, because some violence, I think, even in the past year happened in some of the sort of like third world countries against Jewish tourists. But
Mhm.
this is not only Western country. This is Washington D.C., the
Mhm.
capital of America. America, which is probably one of the least anti-Semitic place, besides like Israel, or at least a place with the most Jews besides Israel. And it happens in the capital. I mean, what can we expect in sort of, yeah, upcoming
You
weeks,
know,
months?
I don't want to speculate, but I think what we're seeing, the rise in anti-Semitism, I mean, it's the proverbial canary in the coal mine, right? It's a symptom of a larger disease in society, and that is the fact that collectivism is on the rise, statism is on the rise in the US and around the world. And as we know, when collectivism and statism is on the rise, when then the group warfare is intensifying, and that's what we're seeing here. Whether that group warfare is between political factions or nations or majorities and minorities, and whatever cause you support versus not supporting that cause. And in this case, it's anti-Semitism. It's really racist, tribal. So I think it's on the uptick, and unfortunately, I don't want to speculate specifically about anti-Semitism, but for as long as that is not countered and pushed back on by rational ideas, by a focus on and championing individual rights and limited government and capitalism, this will continue to escalate slowly but surely.
And so we also have some comments from obviously Israeli politicians. I think Netanyahu has pretty much promised that there's going to be a higher security for the embassy itself, or sort of people who are working for it. But hey, it's a scary situation. Again, they were not targeted because of who they were as people. They were targeted because they were Jewish. That's the only reason. So now, if you are working for the embassy, if you are simply Jewish in, I mean, anywhere in the world, you have to be careful. We had, I mean, people on this channel have like been targeted because either they were Jewish or because they resembled, sort of like they looked Jewish. It's not something that happens to maybe 1 in a million, or sort of this is like a isolated case that sometimes happens. Like, if you are Jewish, you have like, and this is the goal of it, right? It's to make them scared. It's to make them not come out. I mean, on the Daily Objective, we sort of like try to draw some like 30s Nazi Germany comparisons, and I said that thankfully we are not at a point where violence is committed against Jews and the state looks the other way. But sort of like, how far away are we from that, when you have this amount of basically Jewish people should be scared. They shouldn't come out. They shouldn't have anything like showing that they might be Jewish. It is truly a scary situation to be in. That has been, I mean, you said sort of to some extent from Israeli unwillingness to simply do what is necessary in Gaza, but also of the, I think, Western, both the international organizations, but also news sites, basically going on this crusade against Israel, right? I mean, if you take the 14,000 children number that I'm not sure if you saw that, apparently some guy in the UN said if there is no aid into Gaza in 48 hours, 14,000 children are going to die. Now, he had no source for this. He came out, he made that number up. He had no justification for it, but pretty much everybody was using that number. The UN was using that number. News sites had sort of reprinted that number. And this amount of like, this is not even like a journalistic faux pas. This amount of like, basically somebody creates propaganda and you just put it out there. Of course, it's gonna drive like insane anti-Israeli sentiments. Not even that the people like this guy. I don't think he even needed that much. At least apparently on his X page, he was following a bunch of like known Hamas propagandists like on the ground in Gaza. So with people like him who are directly looking it up, but sort of like the general public, the anti-Israeli sentiment, I mean, from politicians themselves, right? The fact that when the Operation Gideon's Chariots started, you had this campaign like Keir Starmer is like, will do anything he can to sort of stop Israel from advancing. It really as much as I would like to sort of like blame Israel for not fighting the war properly, it's anytime they try to, this amount of, hatred coming to them is sort of like unbelievable.
Hmm. Yeah, no, and as I mentioned earlier, it is a sign of the state of the world more broadly, and unfortunately the Jews um, happen to, I mean, historically, and now again well, I mean, we know the reasons, but they become the first target group, and so in that sense, it is a sign of a broader disease in society, and unfortunately, it's on the uptake. And yes, Western politicians are obviously not helping, and in the case of Keir Starmer, he is probably putting his finger in the air and sensing where the wind is blowing in Britain, and looking at his prospects for the future and so on and so forth. So, yeah, it's uh, it's worrisome, obviously.
Yeah, and we'll have to see where generally I think the sentiment will go around this person. I keep forgetting Elias Rodriguez. As I mentioned, the squad has been silent. Besides AOC on this, AOC has condemned this. So good for her. But people like Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib are pretty much silent on this,
Hmm.
which I think to some extent is revealing. And we'll have to see where we go from here, right? When sort of Luigi Mangione case happened, I'm not sure how closely you followed it. The when he killed the United Health CEO, you had some condemnations, but very quickly you had people trying to say bad, right? Okay, this is bad, but the way these companies work or something, trying to like justify this kind of violence. And you had a lot of people sort of defending these kind of actions. You had a lot of even like influencers being behind this. And the question is, we are only on day one, on October 7th, on October 8th, you didn't hear yet that much sort of support of Hamas or denunciation of Israel. But how long are we from people? Like I've already seen, now I haven't seen any sort of known figure sort of straight up like supporting this yet, but I've already seen some people, reposting some things that Yaron. Now might be mispronouncing because I mispronounce it as Yaron Lishchinsky, but it might be Lishchinsky. So maybe if somebody knows, they can correct me. But apparently he had posted. He's an Israeli diplomat, so we would expect him to sort of like post government stuff or sort of Israeli stuff. And he had a post about there was one time where there was a strike at a hospital in Gaza where Hamas was present, and he posted this story. And somebody has already reposted saying it. This guy should have been killed because he has been justifying the Israeli genocide. Like you already are starting to see the same sort of propaganda that has been used against Israel, that has been used against IDF soldiers, that has been justifying violence against Israelis, is already being used to against this couple, right?
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean, Anders, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's not surprising what will happen in the next few days. I don't want to speculate about that. The comparison with Luigi Mangione is, uh, yeah, that there. I mean, it's another sign of the culture in this country. Not to get too deep into it, but our healthcare system is on the one hand the best in the world, but on the other hand, it's a total mess. Um, so to untangle, I mean, the fact that people are supporting or were supporting, and that he kind of turned into an anti-hero for certain parts of the population is obviously, I mean, it's despicable. And yeah, I mean, I guess you could say that it's both that and this recent attack here are symptoms of that larger disease that we're experiencing, that we're facing here in society, and that we're going down the slippery slope towards more group warfare and more collectivism, statism.
Yeah, and sort of, I mean, when it comes to comparisons to Luigi Mangione, I think on one way, in one way, it's the amount of the fact that you disagree with something or you have a problems within society, and you decide to solve it by sort of like
Mhm.
killing innocent people. You cannot. There is no way you can justify sort of
No,
violence
no, I mean
against
that
these
goes
people.
back to our earlier discussion about, the whatever you do in terms of protests. I mean, you draw the line at violating other people's individual rights, including their property rights, and so in that sense, it's yeah, in that sense, it's um, I mean, totally unjustified, obviously.
Yeah, so I guess we'll have to sort of see where we go from here. I mean, of
Mhm.
course, he was arrested. I'm sure. I mean, maybe he'll just plead guilty and he will get some sort of a deal, and this thing won't go to trial. Um, we'll have to see because as I said, Luigi Mangione is somebody who is going to trial because he has pleaded not guilty, so we'll see where that case will go. But either way, this should be very worrying, and it should tell us that Israel needs to do whatever is necessary in Gaza. I mean, we have somebody in the chat yelling peace now. Again, you cannot have peace with people who call for violence, who justify violence. What
Oh,
that
the
Yeah.
best way of achieving peace here is for Israel to occupy Gaza, and for the duration, basically. And we've talked about this on this program before. It's a generational project, and I know many Israelis don't like the prospects of it, but really, that's the quickest way to peace.
Yeah, so I mean, absolutely. Israel should do whatever is necessary to end this war as soon as possible and set up some future that is peaceful for Israelis. Again, Palestinians no longer have, or at least Palestinians in Gaza, although I would probably extend it to all Palestinians in the region. They've lost their sort of self-determination. They've lost their legitimacy to govern themselves because time after time, when they get that sort of thing, they use it. When they get some sort of autonomy, some sort of control over any area, they use it to fight against Jews. They use it to kill as many Jews as they can get away with. And the Western world has unfortunately very much helped them in that regard by basically in the same way, saying, yes, you have a right to exist, even if it means your right to exist means you just want to use that existence to kill Jews. So I think the Western world needs to look in a mirror to see what kind of thing, what kind of movement it has been supporting within the Palestinians, but also Israel needs to realize that unless they take control of the action, unless they take control of what needs to happen in Gaza, you might we might want to blame the West or Palestinians or somebody else for what happens to Israel. But at the end of the day, if Israel gets wiped out, I don't think it would matter whether it was the West who has abandoned it or Israel who hasn't fought it properly. Israel just needs to do what is necessary in Gaza if they want to go live in the future, if they want to actually survive through these events. Um, Anders, any last thoughts from you on this?
No, I think we have exhausted the subject for now, and we'll see where this goes in the next few days.
Well, with that, thank you everybody for watching. We'll be back tomorrow with another episode of the Daily Objective as well as the reality show, especially if more information comes out about this. With that, thank you, Anders, for joining me today. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and bye bye.
Bye.